Hello everyone, welcome to Tactica Imperialis and to today's video. Today is going to be episode 12 of A Town Called Mallus, my Warhammer Age of Sigmar hobby project for the Stormcast Eternals. Today is an episode I had absolutely no intention of making about 4 weeks ago, but then I got reading into the books and then there were some models and well, here we are. So today we're going to be adding, as is kind of typical, one new unit and one new hero. And when I say new, I actually mean new. We're not going to be adding anything you've seen before. We might have a variant on something you've seen before, but most of it is going to be completely new and something that, unless you watch the live streams, you've definitely not seen. So I do hope that you enjoy the models that we've got at the moment, because they will round out the battalion I was discussing last time. So you may remember in the last episode we talked about a particular battalion for the army that I thought about adding in just so as I had the option to run a battalion if I wanted to. And these two units that I've added today complete that battalion at its slightly above minimum requirements, and that's allowing me to run it. I don't know if I will, but I can, and that's always nice. So if you know the battalion in question, you know the units already in the army, you can actually work it out before you see them, but I'm not going to spoil it here for those who don't. This should be either the second or third to last part of the series, because I'm now pretty much heading into exam season. They're going to fall in mid-May. It's now mid-April, so it's time to get everything screwed on and get that done. As a result, I'm not going to be adding any more models, particularly over the next month, for absolutely sure. And whilst I have enough models to do another episode, I don't have anything beyond that, and I'm not going to be adding anything. So the next part that you see for this series may well be the last, with the exception of the end of project showcase that I will absolutely do, because I won't be able to see this army all together, whether it's on the tabletop or it's just on my shelf. I do want you to see the whole army in all its glory, because it's been a real pleasure to work on this army, and I do want to show it all off. Other than that, if after that round of exams I get maybe one more model or one more kit, then I might add that in as like a bonus, but that would probably go in the showcase episode. So realistically, this is the second or third to last part. Third to last if you count the showcase, second to last if you don't. But it has been a real experience doing this series. I'll probably talk about that a little bit more in the next part, because I'm only going to have one unit to add in, ish. So yeah, we'll get to that later, but for now, we'll start with the unit as we so often do, and then we'll get to the hero, the applications, and all of that fun stuff. If you missed any of this series, as always, the links are in the description to both the English version of the series and the French version, which I've been doing side by side with this, and the French version of this particular episode will be out tomorrow. But without further ado, let's get to the unit. This is episode 12 of A Town Called Mallus. Let's go.
Alright, so our first unit for today is 5 Retributors. I got some more Paladins and I gave them some big bloody hammers. Now, some people who I know watch these series will tell you that these guys are the bane of everything that isn't a Stormcast. And they hit bloody hard. Really stupidly hard. So let me go over any paint scheme details first, and then I'll explain how they work on the tabletop and why I'm using them and compare them to the other Paladins that we have, which we got all the way back in like episode 3 or something, which were of course Decimators. So these guys are painted in the typical manner. Let's pull someone who isn't the prime forward for a look. Let's pull this model. So the black armor is typical with the grey cloth, the silver. They've got the extra little piece of plating down across the groin area, and they've also got extra armor plating just in general. Paladins have more armor compared to regular Stormcast. Primarily the thigh plates would probably be the main noticeable difference at a glance, as well as of course the much bulkier left shoulder pad, and I've given them all the hammer shoulder pads. You can have these either blank or with a hammer on them, and all of these 5 have got a hammer on them because, well, they're the hammer guys. I then painted the details of the shoulder pad, like the front buckle, I suppose, in silver, with the exception of the Star Soul mace, actually. but that's fine. And then they have what I believe are reliquaries on the back, and these are just painted in the same way as the armor and the gold with the scroll at the bottom. And you will have noticed possibly already the cloth for the loincloth, I suppose, is blue trim instead of red trim, because as is typical for my army, the second of any unit that I get has blue trim as opposed to red. Red trim for the first unit, and then because you had to have some sort of variation from retinue to retinue, I've got blue for the second unit. So if I ever get a second unit of Liberators, you'll see the same thing. If I get a second unit of Adjudicators, you'll see the same thing. The Prime is actually not using the Prime that you're supposed to use for the Retributor and Decimator Prime. Because if you remember back to my Decimator Prime, he had the axe in one hand and then was holding some beads or something in his left hand, and this guy is not doing that. I've given him the just a classic hammer in his hand, and then just put a shoulder pad over to signify his prime status, as well as the leg pad. I've seen this done before. I know it works. The only limiting factor that you'll have with primes is the fact that the leg pad for the prime is only available on this particular set of legs. So if you're running several Retributor or Decimator primes, they're all on the same set of legs, which is slightly annoying. We also have one with the Starstorm Mace, which is this guy right here. He was on the walking legs last time, so I've mixed it up a little bit and given him a different set of legs. It looks like he's really leaning forward into smashing somebody in the face. So they're nothing different from typical Sons of Mallus that you've seen throughout this series, but I am very happy with them, and they're one of those models where the gold really brings out the paint scheme. Because black armor, I was talking about this the other night with a friend, black armor is really good as a colour scheme. Black is a good colour scheme, but it needs a good secondary colour. It needs a good spot colour. So if you are a Black Templars player for 440,000, you have the white, which helps bring out the details. And with this army, it's the gold that brings out a lot of the detail and helps the model just not look bland on the tabletop. It helps it pop in some ways, and it looks great. I've sung my own personal praise of this paint scheme enough. So I sound really confident and cocky when I say that, but credit to whoever designed this color scheme of black and gold with the extra color on top of if you want it versus Andals of the Heldenhammer, because it is a really, really good color combination. I'm taking no credit for it. It just looks good because it does. I just paint it. So, tabletop. These guys are 220 points for 5, so they're slightly more expensive than other paladins, but they are really, really dangerous. So they move for 3 wounds, 4 up save for every 7, as before. And they get a third attack for their prime, which is fine. But these guys are armed with the Lightning Hammer. So this have 2 attacks that hit on 3s, wound on 3s with a rend of 1, and also a damage of 2. Now that's good already. That's 2 attacks, potentially 4 damage per model if you roll well. However, if you roll a 6 to hit, or more of course, then you do 2 mortal wounds instead. So these guys can actually be a really good source of mortal wounds, which is something that Stormcast aren't lacking per se, but it is always helpful to have a few mortal wound sources sprinkled through your army to just up the damage output of, well, your army. You just need more damage sometimes, and mortal wounds can do that, whereas high damage weapons, whilst good, can't always do that. They also have the Starstorm Mace ability, which is basically pick a unit within 1 inch and do D3 mortal wounds to it. So these guys can, especially if you can buff them, really chuck out a lot of mortal wounds, which is really quite nice. Admittedly, buffing them in Stormcast, I've said this before, is kind of difficult. I mean, I'll go through very quickly the prayers and relics and things like that again to see if there's any auras of +1 to hit that I can find, but that's rerolls hits of 1. You could use Bless Weapons as a prayer on them so that you can get extra attacks if you roll a 6 to hit, but that's not going to happen very often because you don't have loads of attacks. Nope. Nope. Sorry, I know I probably should have looked at this in advance, but I wanted to double check it all. Those aren't aura effects. Nope, there are actually no abilities that will help their chance of getting extra hits. Which is fine, but there are no ways to buff them in Stormcast. So if you can find a neutral wizard who has a spell that can buff friendly units that aren't their allegiance, that would be really powerful, because then you can get mortal wounds on 5s or something. So just worth considering, I think, is that. You also notice that if you remember back to episode 5, I think, we added the concussors to the army. They are my Dracoth Heavy Cavalry, and they are basically retributors, but on Dracoths. And they function exactly the same way. They're just faster, with more wounds, but they also have an ability of stun, which prevents enemies from piling in. The retributors do not have that ability. It must be mentioned. But as much as you might overlook just a unit with 10 attacks that damage 2, these guys are ridiculous. If handled correctly, these guys can just chew through almost anything. I've heard tell of them going through monsters, and certainly of going through heroes like a knife through butter. So these guys are probably going to be the hammer to any anvil that I decide to build. I think that's how they're supposed to be used. I mean, they are a hammer after all. So they might not fit most perfectly into my Vanguard Chamber, because my Vanguard Chamber relies on maneuverability and generally not being anywhere near where my opponent wants them to be to do stuff. The only way that this unit will combo with them, realistically, is through the use of teleportation. So I'd be needing to use Silence of the Storm, a Lord Relictor, or something of that order in order to make them work the way I want them to, where I can use them just as assassins to whack a powerful hero or other enemy in the face really, really hard. So that's the Retributors. I know that I could probably say more, but there's not a lot to say, because they're tough, they hit stupidly hard, and generally you don't want to be anywhere near them unless you're a tar pit unit. And even if you are a tar pit unit, you're not going to last forever, particularly if these guys start rolling, or you can buff them, maybe to get extra attacks or whatever. And even if you can pin them down, the beauty of Stormcast, particularly my style of Stormcast, is I can just whip them out and teleport them away with something like Lightning Chariot, and they're even more of a nuisance. So they are good, and I expect to be using them a lot. Will I use them more than my Decimators? That will depend on meta, because Decimators are really, 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 really good at chewing through hordes and hordes of infantry, because they get one attack per model in range, which is a lot, by the way. They can get absolutely stupid amounts of attacks. The Retributors are better against elite armies who have important buffer heroes, or generally infantry with 2 or more wounds each, or generally is quite an army that doesn't rely on having lots of basic dudes on the board. A Retributor is way better. Given that I'll probably be facing, from what I've heard, Khorne, Nurgle, Beastclaw Raiders, as a general rule of thumb, those sorts of armies, I think the Retributors will see more play in my meta, but I think it will depend on your meta as to whether you should pick these up over something else. But these guys are probably more generally all-round useful, because a unit that has a few attacks at damage 2 and can also do mortal wounds is always good, whereas Decimators are situational, and Protectors, they're all right. They're not my style, but they're all right, I think. They're a decent middle ground if you don't want to go all out offense and want to have a bit of defense as well. But that is this, guys, and that leaves one unit to complete the Storm Vortex Garrison, the battalion we discussed last time, and that is, of course, a Knight-Vexillor. Knight-Vexillors are the standard bearers of a Stormcast army, and they might be the most overcosted unit they've got. I'll explain why in a minute. Let me start with the model. So, This is a really, really nice model. I can't quite show it all, so I'm going to tip it slightly sideways so you can see it all. But this model, I was having nightmares about assembly. But it's actually really, really easy to assemble, so credit to the design team for that. It's also very easy to paint if you are careful. So I recommend, as always, with big models with lots of components that cross over the chest, sub-assemblies for days. I mean, I had this model with the backpack off, the head off, the shoulder pads off, the banner was all separate, the top of the banner was separate, the little warhammer that he's got on his back, that was separate. I had it in so many sub-assemblies while I painted it, because if you don't, well, you might just not get all the details, and we wouldn't want that. I've also done a small amount of kit bashing, so I've swapped the head for a Decimator Prime head from the Paladins kit that I got with the Retributors, because I bought them at the same time. So why I've done that is my Knight Questor, or Gabriel Shoreheart, has the head of a Protector. The Lord Relictor has the head of a Retributor, and now my Knight-Vexillor has the head of a Decimator. Just a little bit of completeness on my part, since I'm not going to be doing it for the Knight Heraldor, and I didn't do it for the Lord Castellan, and I'm probably not going to get a Lord Veritant anytime soon, nor am I planning to pick up a foot-mounted Lord Celestin. I think that's actually almost all the heroes. That's all the heroes that are on foot, anyway. So that's why that's what that is, in case you were wondering. The typical head, do I have its little assembly sheet here? Yes, I do. I think. I've got it, yeah, I've got it here somewhere. Don't mind the noise. Yeah, it's supposed to look something like that. So if I just put that there, and then put that there. Oh, come on. And put that there. You see the difference. It is notable. But anyway, that's a bit of a side point. I then painted him basically exactly the same way as the Paladins, because I basically did them at the same time. The only thing of note is, of course, the banner. I chose the Meteoric standard. I'll explain why as we go through this segment. And I wanted it to really stand out. So the hammer itself is silver, whilst the lightning and the halo coming off of it are in gold. The little meteorites off the side, I was originally going to do in gold, but that might have been too much gold, so I did them in silver. And then the scroll is, of course, in white, because that just makes sense. You've got a purple tassel at the bottom, and then it's completely symmetric, so it's exactly the same on the other side. Really, actually, one of the few times I got to use Sigmarites quite recently. I used Sigmarites on the big lightning bolts, as opposed to Auric Armor. I did the same on the shoulder pad on the Retributor Prime, in case you were wondering. And that's about it. So it's got the red trim, of course, because first of that I've got. He's the first Knight-Vexillor I've got, and probably the only one I'm going to get. The reliquary is nothing different to regular Paladins. That's not a swap. And his hammer is just a hammer. And he's stood on a rock. 2 rocks, actually. So that's the model in terms of looks. Now let's talk about rules. The Knight-Vexillor, for no reason I can fathom, costs, if I've got if the wall scrolls are still correct from the battle tome, 140 points, making it the single most expensive infantry hero in the army, bar none. The only heroes more expensive are, let's see, Lord Celestin on Dracoth and Lord Celestin on Star Drake, of course. Drake Sworn Templar, that's more expensive. Celestin Prime, he's more expensive. But yeah, for all your infantry / winged heroes, he is the most expensive. And I don't think he's worth it. I've got him because I wanted to finish the Stormcast garrison, and I think he looks great. But. Let me run you down his stats. 4-inch move, 5 wounds, 3 up save, bravery 9. So Paladin stats with an extra couple of wounds because hero. He's then armed with a Warhammer, which is 4 attacks, 4s and 3s, no rend, damage 1. That is actually the worst hero that the army's got, because every other hero literally has rend. Lord Celestin has 1 weapon with, 1 weapon without. Lord Relictor has rend and has a better hit roll, which is probably nearest comparison. Lord Castellan, discussed last time, has damage 2. Lord Veritant also has damage 2 and 4 attacks, and rend and 3 up to hit. Knight-Questor has better to hit roll and rend. Knight-Heraldor has swapped hit and wound rolls, but also has rend. Knight-Zeros has better hit rolls and rend. And the Knight-Venator is a shooter, so I don't count that. Because his main method of dealing damage is at range. He's a shooting hero, that's different. So he's the most expensive with bare average stats. I mean, it's Knight-Questor stats. It's got less than a Lord Veritant, less than a Lord Castellan. It's Lord Relictor's stats. It is actually identical to Lord Relictor's stats, actually. So what's he got going for him? Well, his banner gives you rerolls for charges within 12 inches. So all units in 12 reroll their charges. And that's pretty good if your army is playing offensively. It's not good if you're playing defensively, or if you're playing like me, where your army's all spread out playing harassment. That's fine, that's just a way you'd have to build it. But it also doesn't help that he's stupidly slow. Because he's move 4, every other unit in the army can outpace him except paladins who have the same movement stat. Therefore, he's always behind when it comes to getting the charge trigger, so you need to be running him basically every single turn. Not that that's a problem, because he doesn't have a ranged attack, and nor do you want him in melee with attacks like that, but something to consider. And he then has one of 2 banner options. The Meteoric Standard is a one-use only mini-nuke, effectively. You call down a comet in your hero phase once per battle. To do so, pick a point on the battlefield within 24 inches of this model and roll 2 dice, adding the results together. Each unit that is within that many inches of that point suffers D3 mortal wounds. So pick a point in 24, every unit in 2d6, which actually is friend or foe, bear in mind, takes D3 mortal wounds. You play this early enough, it is effectively a nuke. You drop it in the right spot, you nuke everything within 2d6 inches. It can be good for finishing off wounded heroes. It can be good for plink damage on elite infantry, maybe getting rid of 1 key model. It is just generally good chip damage, or knocking off from units at the start of the game, or just generally softening them up before you shoot them or you charge them. Is it that good that you pay 140 points for an understated guy? That's the problem. The other option is the Pennant of the Stormbringer. That's the actual flag variant, which looks something like this. The Pennant of the Stormbringer is once per battle. You can pick a Stormcast Eternal unit in your army in your hero phase, remove it from play, then set it up anywhere more than 9 inches from the enemy. It then cannot move in the movement phase. So it's a one-use only teleport for 140 points. Yeah. When I can pay just over half that cost and get the Lightning Chariot Prayer, which is admittedly over a shorter distance and also requires a roll to trigger, but I can teleport every single turn with a Lord Relictor, or I'm using a Lord Vexillor, who of course has a lot of teleporty chicanery, or I'm playing with Neat Black Talon, who can also teleport like crazy, or the Vanguard Chamber in general can teleport like crazy, or I just use Scions of the Storm because, well, you're going to be doing this quite early, given his terrible movement stat means he's not going to be using it to get you out of melee over a 9-inch range. Oh no, it's got an infinite range. Sorry, it's got an infinite range. Okay, it has an infinite range, so you can pick any unit you want at any time. But still, is it really worth paying more than every other hero in the army when a Knight-Venator can do, with his one-use ability on a 2+ to hit? Is it a 2+ to hit? Yeah, on a 2+ to hit, getting abilities that do potentially D6+3 mortal wounds and pretty much kill somebody. Or the Knight-Zeros, who hits harder and also has the ability to nuke everything within 8 inches, which is your average roll of a 2d6 of him for d3, or chaos for d6. So the Knight-Zeros has the same ability as the Meteoric Standard, and also gives you a shooting buff. The Knight-Heraldor, who has the Thunderblast ability, which again has a small little mini nuke ability, and has an ability about charging. Is it better than a Lord Veritant, who can actually shut down wizards? That's debatable, depends on your meta, but he also hits like a brick with 4 damage to attacks. The Knight-Questor, who admittedly has different abilities, good against heroes, and can also hit quite hard in melee. The Lord Castellans, who can buff your saves, and that's obvious. The Lord Relictor, who has also got, bear in mind, for half the cost, not only does he have that prayer, which could be Lightning Chariot or whatever, he's also got either Lightning Storm or Healing Storm, both of which are very, very good. And you've got the Lord Celestin, who's got a command ability that's very good. He's got a long-range shooting attack that could do basically d6 over 2 mortal wounds. I just think the Knight-Vexillor, while it's good, and I don't dispute that it's good, is just overcosted. If he were 20 points cheaper, maybe I might be a bit more positively inclined. If he costs the same as a Knight Heraldor, maybe. But he does less than a Knight Heraldor, because his ability is one use only, and then he's got reroll charges as an aura, but whoop-de-doo, and he also hits less hard. Fine, whatever, and he costs more. Or Lord Relictor, which is a really terrible comparison, who costs about half the cost, has the prayer abilities, both of which are usable, and has the third prayer, which is usually usable, and can even just do what your banner does more consistently over a shorter range, and is half the price, and hits harder. He just doesn't compare favorably with the other Stormcast heroes for his cost. If he was 20 points cheaper, maybe 30 points cheaper, I think he'd be great. But he's just slightly overcosted. That said, he'll still see a place in the army because he does complete the Storm Vortex Garrison, in which I think he actually is quite useful, because that army, that formation battalion thing, encourages you to cluster to get benefits of immune to battle shock near to your heroes. So they will be gathering around the Vexillor, which means that you can then push on and get that charge bonus. And of course, the teleport ability in an army like the Storm Vortex Garrison can also be used to teleport a newly arrived unit to exactly where it needs to be on the following turn. Or you can use the mini nuke, clear out some space, which is something you can also do. The secondary reason, by the way, that I picked the standard over the pennant is I have a lot of teleportation already, and I don't have a lot of removal. I struggle sometimes to just knock out powerful units. I need mortal wound output, and I just don't need higher damage. I've got a lot of chip damage in the form of my Vanguard stuff, but I don't have a lot of heavy hitting damage removal, whereas the Paladins I got this week, as well as the Vexillor with that standard, will allow me to do that. He can also take the Mystic Standards. I should make a mention of those, since he has got the Totem keyword. I should make mention of it, which means he can be given a Mystic Standard, as soon as I go and find those. So what do they do? I hear nobody asking, but I want to know. Well, you've got the Hurricane Banner, so you can reroll ones for everyone within 12 inches when running and charging. You're already rerolling your charges anyway, so nobody cares. The Lichbone Standard, friendly Stormcast units heal 1 wound in each of their hero phases within 6 inches. That's quite good. And the Pennant of Sigmar on a 2+, only 1 model will flee if a unit fails a battle shock test within 12. Honestly, just take the Lichbone Standard every single time, I think, because it is already encouraging you to cluster. You get some healing. That is very good, because healing is good, because everything in this army has more than 1 wound, which is nice. It is really, really nice to have that. You can just stick him in a nice place behind your battle line and have him just healing everybody constantly. And you also use the Lord Castellan to combo with that, and he's healing even more. So there you go. That is the Knight-Vexillor, and that is the end of this episode of A Town Called Mallus. I do hope you've enjoyed it. It's been a little bit rougher as I go hunting around for documents and things like that, but I do hope you've enjoyed it nonetheless. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I realise I've ragged very hard, particularly on the Vexillor, so if you think I'm wrong, do let me know, because I'm very intrigued to see if you guys can find a use for him either just as a general Stormcast player or in an army such as mine that relies on speed so much. But yes, let me know, because I'm very, very curious. Anyway, thank you for watching Tactica Imperialis. This has been episode 12 of A Town Called Mallus, my Warhammer Age of Sigmar hobby project. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all next time for what will be probably the second to last or the very last part of the series. Thank you very much, and goodbye.